And now we cross over to our Oseong for global insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Just over a year since a military coup overthrew a democratically elected government in Myanmar, the junta continues its brutal crackdowns and repression of the people and the press. The United Nations says over 1,500 people have been killed and 8,800 held in custody during the year-long protest against the military. Global efforts to pressure the regime with sanctions and refusal of recognition of the regime haven't worked. We discussed the situation today with Phil Robertson, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch's Asia Division. Very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, happy to be here.
Well, now, Mr. Robertson, a year has passed since the February coup last year, and this, of course, reversed the progress in democracy that Myanmar saw for about a decade. And, well, even before the junta's takeover, though, the human rights situation, it had been deteriorating in the country. What shape is it in now?
We have seen a sharp decline in the human rights situation in Myanmar since the military coup. To be honest, it is as bad as you can imagine. The current situation is the regime is committing crimes against humanity against its people. The various different monitors of the international community, the civil society groups are all looking at the situation and trying to figure out how it could possibly get worse. But so far, there seems to be no bottom to this. We've seen over 1,500 people killed. We've seen well over 11,000 people arrested. We're seeing shelling in various different areas of the ethnic areas. We're seeing attacks on civilians happening on a regular basis. The military is engaged in its Four Cuts program, where it basically treats civilians in any area where the military is operating as potential enemies, with attacks on civilians being a core part of that. We've seen massacres in Karenni State. We saw one on Christmas Eve where 39 people were stopped at a checkpoint, were bound, were shot, and then were burned in their cars. This included children. Also, two workers of the Save the Children charity were also killed there. Torture and detention has become systematic. We've got as many as 100 people who have been tortured to death in custody. And there's no accountability for the security forces as they continue to rampage through the country, trying to force people to stop protesting, to stop resisting the military regime. On this other side, we have People's Defense Forces who are increasingly resisting the military regime. And that has also involved public bombings. It has involved attacks on civilians who are seen as being close to the military. So on both sides, the violence is escalating. The civilians are being hit very hard. The situation is getting worse by the day.
Well, as you mentioned, people who are already vulnerable, such as women and children, and of course the Rohingya population, they've been among the most affected. How precarious is their situation?
Well, it's a good question. The UN just came out with their assessment of the humanitarian situation in the country. They're estimating that almost 25 million people, which is about half of the country's population, were living in poverty by the end of 2021. This is a huge step back from the previous 8 years where, the democracy period had allowed the economy to flourish and people were doing much, much better. The UN currently assesses that 14.4 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance, that they are facing food insecurity. And so the entire country is being affected by this collapse of the economy, with inflation and the loss of value of the baht, the shutdown of much of the banking system. Many of the people, the foreign investors who are pulling back, the collapse of the tourist industry, all these things have affected people across the country. And women and children, of course, are being hit very hard, as are the ethnic minorities. Now, you asked specifically about the Rohingya. the Rohingya, there's over 1 million of them in the refugee camps in Bangladesh. Their repatriation is on indefinite hold because there's no likelihood that they'll be able to come back with the military government in control, because it was the military that committed crimes against humanity and acts of genocide against them in the first place and chased them out. But I think also the Rohingya still in the country have been locked down in camps. They are effectively facing the crime of apartheid, as we documented in a report last year. And the situation for them has not improved either. So across the board, there's really no good news on the issues of humanitarian issues or human rights.
And again, as you briefly mentioned, the situation with the junta cracking down on human rights defenders and journalists, humanitarian workers. The footage that we're getting overseas, it seems almost unreal, just journalists being beaten up on the streets, being randomly detained, and, well, just all these crackdowns and explosions. And what is the danger that they face, and is there anything that the international community can do to protect them?
Well, journalists are certainly at risk. They are seen as people who are conveying information to the outside world that the junta doesn't want them to see. And so we are seeing the journalists being forced into hiding, reporting from hiding, being targeted for arrest. There was someone who documented the silent strike that took place on International Human Rights Day, which was on December 10th last year. That journalist was arrested for going outside to take photos of the silent strike, which was everybody stayed home and it was the country was entirely quiet. And he was beaten to death in custody by the police. So many of the journalists have been forced to flee the country. They are now either in Mae Sot or Chiang Mai or on the India border. A number of them have gone even further overseas, third countries. Human rights defenders are also on the run. There are literally thousands of people, activists, who have now fled to Thailand and who are operating at the border, getting information, getting news out, providing support back into the country. It is sort of setting up as a struggle for the long haul again, as we saw during the previous times when there were military regimes for almost 50 years before 2011.
And while Western governments have been highly criticised for simply sitting back and watching this as this situation continues to spiral, and it seems that all they've been able to do really is just offer rhetoric about pressure and sanctions and withholding recognition of the military junta diplomatically. But would you say those things have worked at all over the past year? What is keeping the Burmese military in power?
Well, we have seen actions by the international community to raise these issues, and there have been targeted sanctions by a handful of countries, particularly the United States, the European Union, Canada, and the UK. Outside of that, we're not seeing the kind of pressure we need. And the sanctions that they have imposed have been not sufficient. They're not going far enough. The targeted sanctions that we want on the military, top individuals, and the entities, the business entities, and the various different aspects of the military, these are the things that need to be pushed much harder. And we were hoping for more sanctions. We've seen a few more on the first year anniversary, but not enough. And particularly, we're missing oil and gas revenues, which is one of the biggest sources of foreign revenue for the military junta. So we want to see more. We want to see effective action, but there's also a major problem that the international community is really split, particularly at the UN Security Council. And the UN Security Council would be the key for a global arms embargo, which we want to have imposed, and also on a referral of the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court for prosecution of top leaders of the military regime, because Myanmar has not ratified the Rome Statute that created the International Criminal Court. And the UN Security Council is the only way then to have that court have jurisdiction of what's going on in Myanmar. And neither Russia nor China will allow that to happen. It's the same split that we saw for other countries like Syria at the UN Security Council, where despite the horrible situation on the ground, the UN Security Council remains paralyzed because of that diplomatic split. And so what we end up with from the UN is a lot of statements. What we end up from a lot of other countries are a lot of statements. We saw many of them in this just past few days. But the people of Myanmar are becoming cynical. They're like, you're going to talk us to death when we need assistance, we need support. Give us something that is really effective. Don't, just give us another statement.
And well, last March, a month after the crisis, the coup broke out, the leaders of the United States, Australia, India and Japan, they vowed to work together to restore democracy in Burma. What efforts have they been making towards that? And do you think they've been trying hard enough?
Well, the Quad, as that grouping is known, if you look at those four countries, only the United States has done anything. Australia, India and Japan have taken no targeted sanctions, have done nothing, in fact, that really would constitute any sort of serious pressure on the military regime. Japan, in fact, continues to offer slots at its training academy to Burmese military officers. Australia, despite having passed Magnitsky sanctions in December, have yet to impose those on anyone, and we've urged them to use these on the situation in Myanmar, but they haven't done so yet. Even South Korea, which has a great deal of influence in Myanmar because of its economic ties, has done nothing. We have urged countries around the world to join a wider coalition to pressure the military junta to come back to the bargaining table to actually end this violence, to comply with the 5-point consensus that they signed with ASEAN back last April. And nothing has happened outside of just that few group of countries who have raised issues. But, we need more.
Well, as you said, businesses are still doing business with the junta, and, well, some say that stronger sanctions will be ineffective as they will only hurt regular people and not the military regime. What do you think about that argument?
Well, the people of Myanmar are asking for stronger sanctions. There is a great deal of unity for a stronger position by the international community. And in fact, the people of Myanmar have been sanctioning themselves. That is what this civil defense movement is. It is a mass strike where people are refusing to go to work, and it also is an economic boycott. There was a silent strike that took place the anniversary, February 1st, across the country. Again, people not going out, people closing stores. And the military was arresting shop owners for refusing to open their businesses. So what you see is that the people of Myanmar are prepared to use economic tools and economic weapons in their fight against the junta. Why is then the international community being so reticent to do so? And it's important also to note that we are talking about targeted international sanctions. We're not talking about the widespread across-the-board sanctions that we saw previously in the 1990s and early 2000s against Myanmar. So this is looking at specific targets that are either the military or the businesses that are controlled by the military. There are two massive conglomerates, the Union of Myanmar Economic Holdings and the Myanmar Economic Corporation, which are conglomerates that are operated and run by the military for the benefit of the military. And these are the companies that need to be targeted, along with state enterprises like the Myanmar Oil and Gas Enterprise, which is where the revenue from the gas fields in the Gulf of Martaban are coming in, and from which both Total in France and Chevron just withdrew. So we're seeing some pressure, but we just need to see more. And those people who are claiming that sanctions hurt the people should talk to the people. And the people are saying, we need your support now, take action, because it's the economic weapon that we have that will make the country ungovernable and give us an opportunity to have some leverage on this military regime and bring them to the negotiating table.
And of course, Human Rights Watch has been at the forefront of monitoring the situation and also calling on governments to take effective action and making an effective response, really. And well, what measures or actions is Human Rights Watch seeking for Burma?
Well, we have been very clear that we want to see action on the international arms embargo. There are too many countries that are still selling weapons to the Myanmar military junta. Obviously, that's Russia and China, but there are others as well. We've asked for a global arms embargo from the UN. If we don't see that from there, we want to have pressure by various countries on their partners. So, for instance, Ukraine, which people are talking about, is in fact one of the countries that have been selling arms to the Burmese military junta. And, you know, the United States and the EU should tell them not to do that anymore. We also want to see, as I mentioned, accountability for the atrocities that are taking place. And we need to see some sort of international mechanism that will work. If we cannot get it to the International Criminal Court because of the blockage of China and Russia at the UN Security Council, then we need to find some other system, some other, for instance, ad hoc international justice mechanism that could be created to hold the generals of Myanmar accountable for what they've done. You know, there's a long list of things we want. There's a long set of recommendations that we need to see implemented. But right now, it's really not enough leverage to force the military to stay its hand. And we're seeing a real tug of war where the military is using force, often lethal force, against the people to try to stop them from protesting, stop them from resisting. And the people are using their economic tools and, in some cases, armed resistance to fight back. And this is tearing the country apart. We're going to see more violence. We're going to see more human rights abuses in 2022 in Myanmar. And the international community has to do more than just be a bystander.
Well, hopefully the next time we talk, there'll have been some constructive steps towards really alleviating this year-long crisis, but I'm afraid we're out of time today. That was Phil Robertson, Deputy Director of Human Rights Watch's Asia Division. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.